Hello. Following my other video on YouTube, how to hand roll slabs, the way I do it, quite thin, using white earthenware school clay. This is just to show how I join the pieces that I've marked and cut out at another stage. A couple of days after I've rolled the slab out to allow it to get reasonably stiff. But it doesn't like to bend, this clay, particularly when it's as thin as I use it. So I shouldn't leave it too long. But if it's too floppy, it's very difficult to join. Here I'm making a trinket heart, as my friend named it. It's a kind of box with curves. Pretty obvious, really. Quite small. And I'm using what I call my lapillo, my glue, which is really basically just thin slip. Having scored the two sides that need to be joined. Here I'm bending, and you really have to be very careful and slow and gentle bending it, especially that tight. Unfortunately, even if it looks okay now and doesn't crack, it may well crack in drying. I was having a problem with that. But you need a little bit of pressure. And just score. I'm using a part of an old comb. I think there are proper tools for it, but you can make them small this way. Just cut up an old comb. Then I generously apply my lapillo. I find that banging sort of seems to help it bend. Then support it with your thumb. I'm supporting it with my thumb as I'm bending it as much as possible. Very gently following the curve of the base. Sometimes a big knife is very useful. An old kitchen knife. But that's partly guesswork as to where exactly to cut it. Squeeze those pieces together a little bit. Not too much, of course. If you squeeze hard, you leave your thumbprint in the clay, which gives it a texture you may not want. Usually the clay I'm using has already got a texture in it, either of letters that I've pressed in, or using an old net curtain. When I roll the slab, it leaves an interesting pattern in the very soft clay. Now here I'm rolling not with sausages, we say in English. In Slovenia they say snakes, basically, but these are very small, so I call them worms, or choru in Slovene. And to reinforce the join, I do this with everything I make, particularly because I'm working in such thin slabs. The fragile point will be the join, and especially if it tends to dry out quickly, as it sometimes does in the summer, even if you put it in an old fridge, as I do, which is effectively a damp cupboard, non-working, you don't switch it on, but it's airtight, and so the clay dries very slowly. Here I reinforce all the joints. Usually one side is enough. Keep it nice and moist with more thin slip. It's not good if the slip is too thick because it just makes it a bit messy. Water tends to disappear. It's keeping the work surface dry, otherwise things stick to it. Now I use this amazing little tool. I can't remember where I got it. Close up. This is the smallest one of these that I can find. Most of them, I mean, I can't find them anymore, this small, so I'm completely lost without it. But it's theoretically possible to work with slightly larger ones. I think the ball at the end measures something like 6 millimeters, but if you can get it smaller, even better. It's going to work this fine, this small. And I just kind of press it down there repeatedly, going back over the length a couple of times until it's kind of mulched in. Next I use the ball to smooth that down. You can just see some letters that I've pressed into the clay. So there's a texture there that I don't want to lose. So I don't want to get it too messy. But most of this, the water part of this thin slip just disappears. You don't really see it. It's possible to clean it off a little. It's mulching in and then smoothing down. That's it. Cleaning away the debris. Then I use a slightly different tool with a broader curve at the end to kind of clean it up a little. It saves work later on. When it dries out, you can go over with what they call here Scotch-Brite, or as a kind of the green nylon part of a Brillo pad, not with the sponge. Scouring pad, they used to call it. Nylon, not metal. You can use that to smooth them down and make it look clean. Now this is the other side. This applies to everything I make as well. Having put the worm, the small sausage, reinforcing the inside of the joint, on the outside I just smooth it down. This is using the other end of that magic tool. I couldn't be without, basically. Which is just a kind of slightly curved, flattish blade. I suppose you could use something else for this part. A knife or something. Don't let it get too damp or everything starts to stick to it. and fairly carefully. Again, a big knife seems to be easier to do this with. Don't know what to do. Ah, yes, got the underside. Ah, just cleaning off that joint at the point. It doesn't have to be perfect now, because as I said later, when it's much drier and leather hard, I'd say, or greenware, before it's completely dry and goes into the kiln, when it's still quite dark, it's very firm, and you can. A Brillo pad is great. A Brillo pad, a scouring pad. Clean up those joints. Now, to stop the lid sliding off, I've already cut out a smaller heart shape and put an even smaller heart in the middle of it just for decorative effect, but it's also got a practical reason for that, in that joining two largish or fairly large areas of slab together, you're quite likely, or the big risk is, that you will trap air and have an air pocket somewhere underneath, which you won't know about until you take it out of the biscuit firing when it's all exploded, and because of the air pocket. So this helps reduce the likelihood of an air pocket. You could, if you press evenly and quite firmly with a roller over the top, you can kind of push the air bubbles out, and this slip helps to reduce the likelihood of air bubbles. But I don't actually want to press it too hard, because I've got a texture in that smaller heart which I want to keep. So I actually only use a ruler. This is another tool that happens to be an old English one with inches on it, but it's got a metal edge and it's made of wood, and I find it extremely useful for so many things. Pressing out this kind of, if I used a roller, it would probably do too much, and I would lose the texture writing in that smaller heart shape. I'm just using this sort of squared off wooden tool, clean round the edge of the join there. Get it roughly right. Obviously there's got to be at least a 5mm gap, step there to fit, but it can be a little bigger. Very difficult to make it a perfect fit without moulding. But at this stage you can sort of still squeeze and press to make it fit properly.